And welcome back to a special edition of People Talk with your host, Chris R. You're listening to KYRS Medical League Spokane, 88.1 and 92.3 FM. And we have a very special episode that I think hopefully got enough promo and everything beforehand, because we have a lot of people in the room with us tonight, and or this early evening, late evening, whatever you want to call it. And I would love for you guys to kind of go around the room right now and sort of introduce yourselves.
I'm Andrea Brower, and I'm a scholar and activist originally from Hawaii, which is where most of my research and activism is focused. I have been in Spokane for about 7 years, adjuncting, lecturing, and most recently a professor at Gonzaga University, where I was in the sociology department and was the lead instructor of a solidarity and social justice program.
I'm Dr. Kathryn DePaolis, and I am a professor in the School of Social Work at Eastern Washington University here in Spokane. I've been here for about 8 years. And prior to that, I've had, about a 16-year career in social work in all different kinds of fields, and really focusing on kind of justice work and addressing inequities that folks who are marginalized or facing oppression.
I'm Scott Ward, and I'm an organizer with the Party for Socialism and Liberation. I've been organizing a lot of protests for Palestine, for immigrant rights, for workers' rights, a lot of educational events over the last few years, and I'm also a historian. I got my master's degree from Eastern Washington University, and I did a lot of work on the impact of colonialism on the Spokane tribe and other area indigenous peoples, which, the ethnic cleansing and genocide of the people of this land is very mirrored in what is happening in Palestine. And I'm just also honored to be here with you all.
Thank you all for being here. And I want everyone to know that right now the special that is airing is Normalizing a Genocide. So I want you to know exactly sort of what we're going to be talking about. And that is going to be talking about Palestine. So what I want to ask first is, sort of what is the definition of genocide? And feel free, anyone wants to just go ahead and kind of chime in at any point in time. What is the traditional definition of genocide?
Well, and if we look at this, right, there's a legal definition for genocide. So I know we hear the word genocide being thrown around this, right? And I think what people don't understand is there's an actual legal definition that was established at the 1948 UN Genocide Convention. And so it really is about the following acts are committed with the intent to destroy in whole or in part a national or ethnic, racial or religious group. And those acts include killing members of the group, causing serious bodily, mental harm to members of the group, deliberately inflicting on the group conditions of life calculated to bring about its physical destruction in whole or in part, imposing measures intended to prevent births within the group, or forcibly transferring children of the group to another group. So when you hear that the UN, Independent Commission of Inquiry found that Israel is committing genocide in Palestine, or when Amnesty International says this, or when the International Association of Genocide Scholars have come out with this, they're following the legal definition. So this isn't just something that they're saying, this is our opinion. They actually are looking at the legal definition and the actions and the statements that have been made and conducted by Israel.
So what is happening checks all the boxes of the traditional definition of genocide.
According to Amnesty, they found that they were committing 3 of those acts, and the UN said 4 out of those 5 acts. So they're committing, yes, a majority of the acts that are listed in this legal definition.
Can you tell me which ones specifically right now that you can think of right now that were the ones that they were found to have committed?
I definitely can. Killing members of the group, causing serious bodily or mental harm to members of the group, deliberately inflicting on the group conditions of life calculated to bring about its physical destruction or in whole or in part, and imposing measures intended to prevent births within the group.
I think it's also important to say that the genocide is not entirely new. While the classification of genocide is, it comes through a much longer history of, as Palestinian historian Rashid Khalidi calls, the 100-year war on Palestine, right? So Even before 2023, Gaza was an open-air prison, again, as described by human rights expert groups. Palestinians could not travel freely in the territory. They could not enter or exit freely. There was more than a decade-long blockade explicitly designed to allow in only the minimum amount of nutrition. So people were kept basically at the brink of starvation. Now their full starvation is being inflicted. Pre-2023, there was a shortage of drinking water, extreme poverty. People had no access to their own natural resources, which the UN called a war crime. So this most recent genocide lands on top of a 100-year war on Palestinians.
Yeah, I think it's important to understand this didn't start on October 7th, right? I mean, if many people will understand who have studied and paid attention to what's going on in Palestine, in 1948, the Nakba, right, the catastrophe, where over 750,000 Palestinians were removed from their homes, forced from their homes. Over 400 towns and villages were destroyed, so that the state of Israel could be established. So those are the things we have to understand. Like a lot of people focus on, October 7th, since October 7th. This has been going on, as Andrea said, for many, many years, decades.
But seriously, since the 1940s, right? This is when a serious move was made to displace the people who were already living on the land so that a different people could migrate and forcefully remove those that were already living there, right? Because they, somehow had some sort of claim to the land. And that claim stems from religious beliefs and or historical beliefs. I would like to know the difference.
Yeah, I mean, a couple of things I would add on to that. When the founders of Zionism were discussing, where their homeland would be, it wasn't just Palestine that they talked about. They talked about places in Africa, places even in South America that they could possibly go. And then eventually they did land on Palestine. But when they actually went to the British and wanted to get approval from the British essentially and support for this colonial project, they pitched it explicitly as a colonial project not to live together with the indigenous people of the land, but to actually forcibly remove them, and that they would be kicked off the land. But also just to go back to some of this talk about the definition of genocide and what is happening. I mean, when you are trying to completely ethnically cleanse an entire area, I mean, that's the goal. They're trying to push every Palestinian out of Gaza, and you got mass bombardment of civilian centers, of hospitals, of schools. When you're using aid as a way to entice people into an area, and then you're opening fire on them, and you're actually executing people and using aid as bait. This is systematic, and it's something that is intentional, and it's planned, and it's indiscriminate. It's targeting all members of society. They have actually new high-tech devices that are going through, neighborhoods and just blowing up anybody around. Like this high-tech genocide is something we've never seen before. They also use euphemisms, euphemistic language when they're talking, and that's a huge connection to the Holocaust. I taught a course on the Holocaust, and the Nazis used to use all sorts of euphemistic phrases to talk about the horrific crimes that they were doing. And when we talk about what happened before October 2023, well, every couple of years the Israelis did what they called mowing the grass, which was mass bombardment of Gaza, and again, like those type of euphemistic terms of killing civilians, and using this language, this dehumanizing language.
I was just about to say dehumanizing the people that they were doing those things to. And so an example would have been mowing the lawn. What was an example that the Nazis used?
Yeah, so one thing they did when they put the Zyklon B into the gas chambers, they said giving them something to chew on was or even just the whole thing about going to the showers was euphemistic, or the final solution.
And so all of Israel's version of that was mowing the lawn. That's just one.
Yeah,
one of many.
Just one of many. Yeah.
And it's so strange how the human mind works to be able to dehumanize people with such a simple turn of phrase, right? Mm-hmm. But many people died, right, at the hands of monsters, right, and are still dying, right now as we speak. So, it just seems so trivial, right? In so many different ways, right? That someone could just say the right phrase and then we're all just going to just be okay with what's happening to an entire generation or multi-generations of people, the eradication of those people. It just seems so strange. So thank you for your definition for genocide and some of those facts. Like, I think those are things that I did not know. I did not know that Israel asked permission from colonial Britain, right? And I think that says a lot. That speaks volumes.
And I'll just add that, Winston Churchill was no friend of Jewish people. He was a horrific anti-Semite, but he was an ardent supporter of the Zionist project because he knew that essentially that this new state would be a supporter of British interests in that region. And so at first, Israel is a supporter of British interests, colonial interests, and then now U.S. interests in the region. And so,
strategic move.
Yeah, strategic. Yeah, it's all about imperialism.
There was no advocacy in there. There was no compassion. It was strictly strategic.
Well, and I think it's important to note as well is that some of those early founders of Zionism weren't Jewish, right? And so there's been this major push to really conflate Zionism with Judaism. And that's not the case, right? Zionism is an ideology, right? And Judaism is a religion. And we have to be very clear about that. And that's one of the ways which, we can talk about at some point about the repression, right? And one of the ways you do that, and the one of the ways is to conflate those two, right? And basically accuse anyone who is against Zionism, anti-Zionism, as being, right, an anti-Semite. And that's the way that they look to silence. And it's really sad. And, one of the things they said when they were establishing the state of Israel, right, was a land without a people for a people without a land, completely ignoring that there were people living in that land. Palestine has been there, right? And so it's very interesting. And the dehumanization is just... It's been years, we've been programmed for years to think of Palestinians and folks in the Middle East, right, individuals as terrorists, and they're out to kill us, and they're out to harm us, and right, and they're not good people, and they're violent. And if you, and that's what's happening in Israel. Like, you see the indoctrination of the citizens in their schooling, and so it's not surprising that they're seen as less than. We see it in our own country with. African-American Black population, the teen population that we're seeing now, right? Mexican-Americans and what's happening to them.
Mexican immigrants, as of the last year or two, they're eating our dogs. We're talking about Haitian, folks and whatnot, and immigrants. It's like some of the most insane things that a person could ever say about a people's. But we'll get more into sort of like, I guess, how the average, U.S. citizen, the average American could understand what it feels like to be a Palestinian in this situation. But we'll get there in a second. So,
sure.
Before that, I kind of want to hear how has genocide become normalized here in the U.S., right? And then we're going to go ahead and pivot to around the world. But let's start just with the U.S. for right now. How have we normalized it? How has it been normalized, like by our current political system and political party, et cetera?
I mean, so I think we're going to drill into a lot of details here, but I would say just very broadly speaking, there's been a very powerful concerted effort to divide and demonize the movement that is standing for Palestinian and really all life. And part of this is an attempt to tell us that when our hearts shatter watching tens of thousands of children blown to pieces by bombs and millions of people caged with no food, that somehow that means we have less love in our hearts for other children, right? Or to tell us that we can't stand against U.S.-Israeli colonial massacre without being anti-Semitic, to tell us we can't speak about a Palestinian life without offending a Jewish life. And these are absurd propositions that we need to firmly reject if we're going to hold on to our common humanity. I think this kind of colonial genocidal project is really targeting people's ability to make sense of the bloodbath and the cruelty, to convince people that it is some form of unavoidable, right? Just an inevitable, quote unquote, clash of civilizations, some supposed age-old religious ethnic warring, this hardwired human conflict that is, quote, too complicated to do anything about. And these are all ideological alibis of the mass destruction of Palestine, and they are all false, right? The violence is being manufactured. It's being manufactured by the powerful. The genocide in Palestine is an outcome of settler colonialism, of capitalism, of racism, of apartheid, and imperialism, most notably of the United States, right? Of American empire maneuvering to maintain global capitalist hegemony. So the fact is that war, coups, destabilization, and backing atrocious regimes has long been a strategy for maintaining U.S. domination and capitalist oil interests in the Middle East. And what we are witnessing now, in part, is the contradictions of these brutal systems coming to new breaking points and the use of increasing violence to sustain Israel's settler colonialism and an American capitalist world empire, an empire that is putting all of us on a road to World War III, to complete environmental breakdown, and to flat out global fascist oligarchy. So people are rising across the world, really, against this dystopia, against elite power and elite terror, which is why efforts to repress and to silence our movements are also getting all the more extreme.
Wow. Well said.
Yeah,
really well
100%.
Thanks.
And you've just touched on censorship, but we could get there soon. I want to hear what you have to say first.
There's so much there. Like
I'd love to go ahead and move towards that in a
yeah.
second.
Well, I think we can, because when we talk about how it's been normalized, it leads into some censorship and repression, right? Because it's being normalized to shut down, as Andrew was saying, right? To shut down people speaking up against it, like what we see what's happening in our college campuses, what we see what's happening to people who are being fired from their jobs, right, when they're speaking up. And so I think part of it we have to recognize too is the fact that when we look at our elected officials, right, when we look at the federal government, out of 535 members of Congress, only 12 members have not taken money from pro-Israel PACs. And that one of them, for example, the American Israel Public Affairs Committee, AIPAC, which we hear a lot about. Only 12 of our elected officials have not taken money from
out
the pros.
Of how many?
Out of 535.
Wow.
Just recently, I think last week, the Israel brought, I can't remember, over 100 state and local officials to Israel on an all expenses paid trip. So this is what's happening, right? So our government is being, basically given money, right, to support whatever Israel wants to do. And so that's part where we see that government repression. There's an understanding of why that's happening, right? And so we have to understand that piece of it as well when we think about why is this happening. Our media, right? We talk about dehumanization. Look at the way our media describes a Palestinian death, or when a Palestinian child dies, as opposed to if an Israeli person is killed. Both are horrible and wrong, right? And at the same time, the way that they're dehumanized by media is just another way that it continues to normalize what's happening there.
Yeah, and I would just, I think, add that, these politicians who are supporting the Zionist project, it's because they're serving the interests of the billionaire class, of the ruling class, that is that benefits from global hegemony, that benefits from dominating all these different regions of the world. And so we gotta understand that piece, that this is. It's just like how we got lied into the Vietnam War, how we got lied into the Iraq War, lied into Libya. All these Afghanistan, all these demonization attempts, that were proved successful, right? They use the media, they use the propaganda to say, in Kuwait, they're ripping the babies out of the incubators and stuff like that, which was not true at all. 100% not true. It's not that Saddam Hussein is good. He's a bad guy for sure. But using this, over the top demonization and this weapons of mass destruction to get consent for this war, right? And same thing in Libya. That was a nation that had one of the highest standards of living in Africa. And now afterwards it had open air slave markets because of our and NATO's bombing campaign, and there was tons of lies about Gaddafi that were, with the saying that essentially that he was giving Viagra to his soldiers to go out and commit sexual assaults. Completely 100% disproven. But so now with Palestine, it's even more intense because you have this settler colonial Zionist interest in keeping this project going, and you have this critical part of the world that the U.S. uses Israel, the ruling class in the U.S. uses Israel as an attack dog on any independent progressive movements in the region, or just any independent movements, any movements that don't want to be having to serve the interests of U.S. and Western capitalism. And so, that's really the driver. But the good news is that actually the normalization is starting to fail. It's really starting to fail. 60% of voters want an end to weapons support for Israel. 60%. 70% of Democratic voters want an end to weapons support to Israel. That is showing that the movement in the last 2 years has done this. The people taking the Palestine solidarity movement into a mass movement for Palestine has made a real difference. And, the Democratic Party is at a crisis, right? I mean, you have Hakeem Jeffries, who, said Israel today, Israel tomorrow, Israel forever. I mean, literally quoting segregationists, what was it? The governor of Alabama from the 60s who said segregation forever, segregation tomorrow, segregation, same thing, literally the same words. And that's who's leading the Democratic Party. And you wonder why their approval rating is even lower than Donald Trump's right now.
Yeah, it's like 22%,
it's
right?
just incredible. You wonder why, working class people are bailing on you, because this is like what your leadership, you're serving the corporations, you're serving the business interests, you're not actually responsive to the people. So it's really inspiring though. Half of the U.S. population rightly calls this a genocide. 91% of 18 to 34-year-olds disapprove of Israel's actions in Gaza. 91%. So the Zionist narrative is failing, and that is why we're getting so much repression, because they know it's in a crisis mode. If they don't stop it now, it's over. And as long as we keep educating and keep mobilizing and organizing, the Zionist narrative is over.
Agreed.
We're going to take a quick break, and we'll be right back.
This is Rafa Zamora to invite you to listen to the show El Puente, La Voz Latina, where we'll have live interviews, news, and information for our Latino Hispanic community in Spokane, as well as entertainment, news, and much more. Join us every Monday from 2 p.m. on KYRS 88.1 and 92.3 FM.
El Puente, The Bridge, La Voz Latina.
This is your KYRS live and local calendar for September 26th to the 28th. Friday, Jason Lucas at AK Asian, Tyler James Rosenbaum at Emrys Beer and Mead Works, Stephanie Ann Johnson at Hamilton Studio, 8 Bells at the Big Dipper, Antique Sex Machine at Jackson Street, and Buffalo Jones, Silver Treason, Betsy Rogue, and Raj St. Paul at the Chameleon. Saturday, the Angela Marie Project, Atomic Jive, and Light and Mirrors at the South Perry Street Fair, Jonah Gallegos, The Dirty Champions, Regression, and Geneva at the Pergola Event Center, Vega String Quartet at Barrister, Lily Isabella at the Boiler Room, The Soulful Brothers at Chan's Red Dragon, Sonic Daydream at the Red Room, Wonky Willa, Dirty Vacation, and Sav at the District, Cyclops at Riverside Place, and the Spokane Jazz Orchestra at the Myrtle Woldson Performing Arts Center. Sunday, Luke Rain at Patera, Common Ground at Arborcrest, Joe Caplow at the District, and Too Slim and the Taildraggers at Chan's Red Dragon. For an entire hour of local musicians, tune into Sounds of Spokane every Sunday night at 8 on KYRS.
Lilac City Records is a streaming platform from Spokane Public Library that highlights original music by local artists. Musicians whose albums or EPs are accepted receive a $200 honorarium, and their work becomes part of the library's regional music collection. Details and submission information are at records.lilaccitylocal.com.
And we're back, and you are listening to Normalizing a Genocide with Chris R. on People Talk. This is a special edition, so thank you for joining us again on this Thursday evening. So I want to jump back in. So I want to talk about sort of what we left off on, which was censorship. So let's talk about how is that happening, and then we're going to segue into more of like sort of how it's happening, I think, in and around universities in America, right? So can we touch on that a little bit? Censorship in general. What are some of the ways that America is censoring the Palestinian movement?
Well, a lot of it's just pressure around like your employment. I mean, if you speak
Capitalism.
out, and if you speak out in favor of Palestinian people, if you speak out against the genocide, against the fact that 680-some thousand Palestinians have been killed in Gaza in the last 2 years, according to academic studies, half of which are children. I mean, this is unprecedented. I mean, if you took that scale of slaughter and put it onto the United States, it'd be, millions and millions of people, right? I mean, it's really... And so it's, I mean, if you speak out, you're risking your job, your livelihood. So, people come after you at your job, especially in academia, as we're going to, I'm sure, talk a lot about. And it's stressful. It really, I mean, it really is mentally and emotionally exhausting to go through that.
It's a true sacrifice. Yeah. You have to give up sort of a part of your life in a system where you are sort of forced to have to participate so that you can eat, right? And you can sleep and you can afford wherever you're resting your head under whatever roof you live under. And it's sort of going straight for the jugular. It's like, well, okay, you want to go against colonialism and oppression? Well, then let me show you what it's like to be a slave. Right? And so you either do your job and you shut up, right? Or you have an opinion and you may risk, losing whatever lifestyle you're accustomed to, or potentially losing your life, right? It really depends on the level of radicalism, right? On whichever side of the spectrum. So, no, I think it's a dirty move in my opinion.
Yeah. Well, and if you look at, we'll talk about universities and what's been happening, unfortunately, in universities across the country, but even in newsrooms, right? Journalists have come out and said that they've been told that they cannot, by their editors, that they cannot mention genocide, right? That they cannot say certain words when they're describing what's happening in Palestine and Gaza, and that they have to take that an approach that is sympathetic to Israel. And that's happening, that's why we've seen folks starting their own, like journalists starting their own, independent media companies, right? Because they, if they've had the ability to do that, and people leaving or being fired for that. I mean, you've seen it where, it's so absurd where someone does an interview with someone and actually reports the truth, right? And then they have to come back in like the next day and say, we would like to apologize. Israel denies that this has actually happened. And it's absolutely ludicrous, but that's part of the repression, right? When you have our government and the current administration basically signing executive orders that, they're going to deport people if they've posted things. They're going to potentially deport people if they've posted pro-Palestinian messages, right? That they're going to check people's social media, and even now with they're a bill that's trying to go through, that they're trying to get through, that they're going to take people's passports. I mean, it's become really
dystopian.
Yes, exactly.
Authoritarian.
Thank you.
And dystopian.
Yes.
Every time I wake up, I wonder what dimension, what portal did I fall into just about, last November. But I mean, things have been going on for a long time. Things have not been great for a long time, but things have also not been polarized to the point that they are now across the board. And, I think it's one thing to be polarized over fictitious ideas, and it's another thing to be polarized and radicalized by things that are actually happening, right? So you are advocates of something that is actually happening. It is not fake news. It is an actual event that has been happening now for 2 years plus, right? And a lot of people have lost their lives. And now there are people, women, children, everyone across the board in starvation, right?
Yeah. Well, and I think it's important to note, like, yes, the 2 years it's happened and we've seen it ramp up since, the last election. However, this, as we've talked about in context, right, this has been going on for decades and it's been supported financially, right, from the U.S. government, whether it be Republican or Democrat. So this is not a one-party issue. And I think that's something we need to be really clear about, because I think we tend to be, kind of all the blame goes to one party, we've got to get away from that and understanding this is a bipartisan issue when it comes to support for Israel and Empire
is highly bipartisan,
right?
I like the choice of word.
Thank you. Yes.
But I do want to touch, the difference between this genocide and any others that have occurred in the past is now it's live streamed, right? people have cell phones. People have means of communication to still be able to get their own journalism out of these situations, right? That otherwise were not able to be done in the past. World War II, the Holocaust, there were no cell phones. There was no way to, tap into social media and really show what's going on. So, I know that, social media, is a double-edged sword, but would you say that it does actually still give, individuals an outlet to be able to tell their truth?
To some extent, I would say you've seen repression on social media as well.
Oh yeah,
right.
And so 100%.
Right. I mean, you're seeing like Meta is silencing folks. Right. They're removing pro-Palestinian posts. They're closing the accounts of folks who are popular speaking out on pro-Palestine, who some have millions of followers, and they've canceled their accounts permanently. And you also see TikTok. Right. Like it came out. Supposedly it was because the Chinese were stealing our data on TikTok, right? But it came out, I think it was Mitt Romney who admitted it was because there was such a pro-Palestine kind of lean in on TikTok, and that the young people, right, were really learning and seeing what was happening in Palestine and in Gaza. And so that's why we're seeing now, right? I think Trump just signed the order or the bill, whatever, to buy TikTok.
Mm-hmm. So to control that.
So we will now,
platform.
it will now be an American TikTok, that you're supposed to go on. So that's all an effort to repress, to silence. Right.
That was the word I was looking for. Silence.
Yes, to silence. So yes, it helps because we all get it, and it's a way that the folks in Gaza are trying to communicate with us. Although let's be honest, they've killed. I was just writing this today. They've killed around 240 some journalists in Gaza. So now you're seeing less and less about what's happening now as they're ramping up, as Israel's ramping up, because they've killed all the a majority of the journalists in Gaza. But so you're seeing that silence. So we're not. It's still hard to even get the full picture.
Can anyone recall the last time that there was such an extremism towards journalists during? And I don't want to use the word conflict. I don't want to use the wrong word, right? I want to continue to stick with the word that we've all used in this room over the last 32 minutes, which is genocide, right? It's not a conflict. Only one side is fighting, right? The other is passively trying to end it, right, as best as possible with limited resources and limited help from the rest of the international community.
One side's an occupier and one side's occupied.
Yeah.
And so that's what we have to look at. And the Committee for the Protection of Journalists have said this is an unprecedented attack on journalists. This has not happened before.
Never been anything like this before.
No.
And that's terrifying, right? Because we're talking about the polarization. We are seeing such an extreme reaction to something, and why?
Why is that happening?
Yeah. Why? It's a rhetorical question, but also a question, right? Why? Right?
Yeah.
And you touched on it.
Silencing.
To silence anyone involved with trying to have any opinion other than the status quo, which is this is our mission from God. This is what we're meant to do, and we are going to support our brothers, right, in God, right? Our chosen brothers in God who have now rightfully taken back their land from someone who lived there before them.
Well, yeah, you don't want people to see what's happening, so that you're trying to silence the folks who are showing you what's happening. Because like you said, the live streaming of a genocide, they don't want that to get out there.
No, and we've seen religion used as a tool to justify, right, murder, which is an age-old tale. And you can read the Bible that they are preaching from. It shows that it has happened many times over to many different peoples. So right now, it just so happens, and sadly, right now, the people that are under that microscope currently are the Palestinians, right? That are in those crosshairs. I'd like to change the words that I use. Let's talk a little bit about kind of what's happening right now, like on university campuses, okay? Anything that has anything to do with any kind of pro-Palestinian advocacy.
You look at me.
You were personally affected by this, so I would like to hear from you first.
Okay, yeah. Do you want me to start with? My story's in the local media. You can read my open resignation letter at Range. Should I start there? I don't want to be repetitive.
I would, because I want
Okay.
to make sure anyone that maybe have missed
Sure.
that last time that you were on, I want to make sure that they get the full picture.
Sure. Yeah. So I was a lead instructor in a solidarity and social justice program. And in my classes, we not only studied oppression, but resistance and the possibility of change. We denaturalized injustice, and we denaturalized extreme situations of hierarchy and inequality and oppression, and continuously looked at historical and contemporary examples and evidence that things can actually be different, be better, that society can change for the better, right? Humans are not hardwired for oppression. So when people start to study these social facts to understand their power together, they often want to engage in movements for a kinder world. And this is what many, many of my students were and are doing. And I think this is why I especially was targeted, because I was known to be close to student organizers and because I refused to be silent in the face of genocide. When I started joining student protests for Gonzaga to divest from genocide and to end its partnerships with weapons manufacturers, I began getting harassed. Some of this was sort of ordinary, and I don't mean that it was ordinary like we should normalize it, but this is what is happening. Really, my story is similar to many, many other people's stories. So I face character slander. I was always getting my signs ripped off my door. I was getting people calling me an extremist and putting signs over my door calling me so. There were emails that went out to the entire faculty forum that insinuated things like me being a Holocaust denier or a terrorist supporter, other forms of immoral and anti-intellectual. And all of this kind of culminated in a non-discrimination policy complaint that was filed by a faculty member who I have never met. The person who filed the complaint against me had already bragged to other colleagues about their intent to use non-discrimination policy to shut down voices for Palestinian human rights. And they targeted me as part of a much wider, highly resourced effort to weaponize Title VI non-discrimination law to silence critique of Israel. And I'd love to talk more about that in a bit. The university handled my case in egregious fashion. I went on medical leave. They told me that I was not going to be able to communicate with them while I was already on a pre-approved medical leave, so I really had no representation through the process. They never told me the specific allegations against me, so I wasn't able to even respond adequately to the allegations against me. When I alerted them to the wider context of Title VI and these investigations being used to basically shut down people speaking about Palestinian humanity, they first ignored me and then told me that I could seek mental health counseling if I was concerned about my personal safety. 7.5 months into the investigation, I found out what the allegations actually were. They were absurd. They were really, my university could have looked at them and investigated them within a few days, come to the conclusion that they were an outright blatant political attack. They were that I attended a student protest where somebody used the word genocide, and that in the context of Gaza, and that genocide is a form of Holocaust denial, and that I forwarded an open student letter about our anti-protest policy, which was signed by hundreds of our students. And that in that letter, and I think I'm quoting it pretty precisely, it said, university personnel have turned to the sinister tactic of divide and conquer. And they said that by forwarding an open student letter that used the word sinister, I was engaging in anti-Jewish conspiracies. And so those were the allegations against me, which it took 7.5 months for them to investigate. Through this process, they interviewed numerous faculty who take a very different political stance than I do on this, that were all named by the complainant. It was very clear to me that the investigator had very little knowledge of the wider debate and context under which this was unfolding, so I suggested many other witnesses who were not contacted. So they conducted the investigation in a, I would say, pretty lopsided way. And even though they had to come to the conclusion that all of these allegations were unsubstantiated because they were clearly so absurd, they still tried to use the investigation in this kind of like backdoor way to silence me. So at the end of my case closure meeting, I was told, even though these allegations have been found unsubstantiated, we still have concerns with your conduct, and we are sending these to the provost for intervention. And these concerns were, how do I summarize? You make people uncomfortable talking about Palestine. That's how I can best summarize them, right? There was no evidence for any of their concerns. There was no investigation for any of these things they called concerns, but they were basically putting me on notice that I needed to shut up. So I came to the conclusion that I can no longer do honest, meaningful, rigorous, justice-oriented teaching or scholarship or work from within the institution, and I publicly resigned in August. I see myself as simply kind of moving my work outside of an institution that's aiming to police emancipatory thought and hope, really in the most ironic of ways, given Gonzaga's marketing and supposed mission of social justice and standing with the poor and oppressed. And
you answered my next question, which is, how is like this situation, right, affected academic freedom and repression, right? How is that you answered it with a personal story right now of how you lost your job, right, for caring too much about Palestine, right, Palestinians. Yeah. And you made people uncomfortable, reminding them of what was happening in the world every day.
I just want to jump in real quick on that. Imagine in the 1940s, someone being pushed out of their job for opposing the Nazis because they were making Nazis uncomfortable. Imagine that, right? Like, people who are Zionists are saying, well, I'm uncomfortable because you are factually calling out a genocide that Israel is committing, and that makes me uncomfortable. That's just, that's the world we're living in here.
Yeah.
Well, and this is a local example of something that is happening across the country at universities, right? We are seeing tenured faculty being losing their jobs for speaking out or supporting students who are speaking out. If they were supporting students who were protesting at the universities, asking their universities to divest from a country that has been found to be committing genocide, and they have asked them to divest, and faculty have gone to support, and they've lost their jobs or been faced penalties for that. Students, goodness gracious, our students who give me hope. I'll tell you this, honestly, students give me hope because they are facing all kinds of repression where they are having their diplomas taken away. They're not. Yes, we've had students who have had their diplomas revoked for speaking out. They've been suspended. They've been expelled, and yet they still speak. Right? I mean, we had some students who were even deported or attempted to be deported. So this is happening around the country.
How are these things legal? I don't understand the legalities of it, I'm not a lawyer, but how are these things legal to withhold someone's diploma after they've accomplished a degree, they've done what they were supposed to do, paid their tuition? How is that legal?
And I'm not a lawyer either, so I can't say whether it's legal or not. They've changed policies. Like, you're seeing universities change their policies and procedures to be able to fit what they want to do in there. And also, I think they're banking on the fact that do the students have the means to fight a legal battle?
Exactly.
Right? I mean, I think that's part of that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, because
they can strong arm.
Yeah, I mean, we know in this country it's better to be rich and guilty than innocent and poor, and so this is how our justice system works, and it serves the interests of the ruling class. And I just want to say, incredible courage both of you have, and our students who are out there. I mean, if people haven't seen the film The Encampments, highly recommend checking that out. We've had some local screenings of it. We probably will have another coming up in a few months maybe. But the student movement, the professors and the educators on these campuses who are, really risking a lot. But this is how actually the narrative does change, is that so many people, becomes a mass movement, that so many people are joining the struggle, that actually the other people who are doing the repressing are the ones that become isolated. And so hopefully we can keep building this movement to where it will become actually safe to do the work that y'all are doing. So.
The more people who speak up, the safer all of us become. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Right? It's harder to attack and go after, a large group of folks, and so that's key.
Yeah.
Well, and I admire, like, you know, your morals and values with what you went through, right? And you decided to part ways, right? You didn't really decide that. You were sort of forced to make a decision, right? And that was either to become complicit and silent in things that you really feel passionate about and something that you care deeply about, or here you go, here's your walk-in papers, right? And you had to do that. So I'm sorry, right, that you had, not from a place of sympathy, right, but empathy, right? I'm really sorry that you had to go through that, especially in our community. You know, I'd like to pride ourselves on, you know, continuing to strive towards being more compassionate and diverse in our community, right? And that can't happen, right, if people are silent. Mm-hmm. And that's why we're having this conversation tonight.
Yeah.
So we have to take a quick break. We'll be right back.
Join me, Robert Sevilla, for Creative Mindset, Thursdays at 4. In that hour, I'll be talking to locals that have the creative mindset. Tune in to find out more about creative minds around you.
KYRS exists because of the support of the public. We thank you for giving a little back with sustaining monthly support to continue independent music, local interest, and progressive news programming that is refreshing, engaging, and helps expand perspectives. Just text GIVE KYRS to 44321 and help keep KYRS on the air.
Some decisions change lives. This is one of them. If you've been thinking about donating that old car or truck to KYRS, now is the time to turn intention into action. Because what may seem like just an unused vehicle to you is something far greater to us. It's a lifeline, a way to keep independent voices on the air and the music playing. Together, our generous listeners who donated vehicles covered nearly 10% of KYRS's expenses. A remarkable gift that keeps us focused on what matters, delivering the programming you love without extra on-air fundraising. We make it easy, from towing to tax receipts. We handle everything. All you have to do is make the call. Don't wait. Your generosity keeps community radio strong. Call 855-KYRS-CAR today. That's 855-579-7227.
And we are back. And again, you are listening to Normalizing a Genocide with your host, Chris R. of People Talk. And
I'm sorry.
Go ahead, and I'd like to reintroduce you at the top of the hour.
I'm Scott Ward.
I'm Kathryn DePaolis.
Andrea Brower.
There we go. Perfect. Scott, you're perfect for radio, man.
What's happening?
So I want to let you go ahead and sort of just like piggyback on what we were just talking about, the oppression, right, within universities and campuses. Can we kind of continue that?
Yeah, let me just talk a little bit about how this kind of repression is operating at universities, because people might think about the more high-profile firings like Maura Finkelstein and Catherine Frank that have sort of made the mainstream media, or administrators calling upon cops to violently attack peaceful student protesters, right? The state violence that we witnessed and put on students who were standing for Palestine was the most that has been used against students since the Vietnam War protests. We might think about the deportation and incarceration of campus-based Palestine solidarity activists. But additionally, there's been kind of a less visible to the public effort to repress and retaliate against people who are standing for Palestine. So this is happening via canceled educational events and films, canceled publications, entire journal articles being canceled on the topic of Palestine, the canceling of classes on the topic of Palestine, people increasingly having their classes monitored and censored, people being instructed to take signs off their door and off their desks. I know people who have been instructed not to wear keffiyehs on campus. All of the intense and widespread harassment and doxing of students and faculty that are standing with Palestine. And it's really kind of the wider atmosphere of silence that is being manufactured via the violence, the retaliation, the repression, right? There's an intense chilling effect to all of this. The innumerable ways that public discourse and thought about Palestine and Israel gets severely narrowed, totally scripted and infused with fear. And that fear is very palpable on university campuses, right? This is just anecdotal, but it appears to me that most of my colleagues are reluctant to even say Palestine, much less allow conversation about Palestine in their classes. I have been told by so many students that they're quite literally barred from having conversations about Palestine in their classes. So this silence and the silencing is something we really need to be giving our colleagues the courage to collectively stand up against, because accepting this kind of McCarthyism has implications far beyond Palestine, right? It's entirely related to the silencing of conversations about race, gender, real history, climate change, quite literally anything that pushes back on reactionary thought. And I just want to give a little bit of a sense of the scope of the retaliation and the silencing. And I want to say that this was starting long before Trump, right? So months before Trump even took office, liberal actors and liberal ideology were already the ones coming after students, sicking the cops on students, passing anti-protest policies that were scripted literally with architects of Project 2025, including Gonzaga. Gonzaga was one of over 100 campuses that instituted draconian anti-protest policy in the fall of 2024. So it's incredibly telling of where liberal ideology and capitalist-driven, profit-driven higher education has taken us, that before an authoritarian took power, we were already doing things by essentially aiming to ban protests and shut down protest movements. So, now that we've arrived at Trump 2.0, it's hard to know the scale of direct retaliation that is being faced. There is some amount of tracking that is starting to take place by groups like the Middle East Studies Association. But things are very underreported. Many things take place quietly. People are isolated and scared, and that is the intent. Many people are instructed once they are, say, under investigation that they must remain silent. A lot of people are forced to sign non-disclosure agreements. And with, say, adjuncts or lecturers, of over which half of university employees now are, it can be very difficult to definitively prove that someone's contract simply was not renewed because of their stance on Palestine. So one of the contexts that we need to talk about is the corporatization of universities, right? And the making of precarious academic labor that has made us so vulnerable to these fascist attacks. But as of today, we have seen several dozen known cases of people that have lost their job, been fired or suspended or forced to resign in retaliation for their stance for Palestine in higher ed faculty, and this include tenured and non-tenured faculty. Dozens of similar cases in K through 12. There's not a lot of media focus on K through 12, but the phenomenon is similar. And again, these are just the documented, well-known cases of direct employment retaliation. This is just really the tip of the iceberg. To give just one more example, and then I'm going to stop talking, UC Berkeley, which of course is credited as the home of the free speech movement, UC Berkeley alone just shared 160 names of students and faculty with the Trump administration as part of an investigation targeting Palestine solidarity activists. And this included international students that are highly vulnerable to attacks from the federal government. So, like is happening elsewhere as university administrators succumb to a fascist agenda, the university's normal procedures for handling complaints were totally suspended, and the accused students and faculty were stripped of their basic rights to respond to the claims or even to get information about the allegations. So Berkeley's response, when they were put in the spotlight for this, to the criticism was, we're subject to oversight by government and we have to fulfill our legal obligations. This is something we need to call, no, I'm not going to swear, no, right? Like, compliance with authoritarians is not the answer. You cannot appease fascists. So compliance is exactly what is bringing us towards full throttle fascism. And the fascists themselves are not following the law in this. It's an extraordinarily weak excuse for Berkeley and all the other universities to hide behind in their compliance and their complicity.
Amen.
Amen.
I think that's a perfect way for us to go into the break, and then we're going to pick back up at the top of the hour. So you are listening to KYRS Medical Lake Spokane, 88.1 and 92.3 FM. And again, you're listening to Normalizing a Genocide with your host, Chris R. from People Talk. And we will be back in about 5. KYRS Medical Lake Spokane, 88.1 and 92.3 FM. And we are back for a special edition of People Talk with your host, Chris R. And you are listening to Normalizing a Genocide. And I want to get back and jump right back in for the sake of time, because I don't want to waste time, right? Apparently, and especially these days, having any kind of conversation that is uncensored in any way, shape, or form is a very important moment to have. And so I want to make sure that we're making the most of it. So you're listening to KYRS Medical Lake Spokane, 88.1 and 92.3 FM. So I want to talk about some of the positives right now from the movement, right? So, despite like the repression that we are seeing daily and have seen daily, the movement itself has been growing and shifting. So over the last 2 years, what has the movement for Palestinian liberation achieved nationally and globally, right? What has changed? I think we've touched on it a little bit in the last hour, but let's sort of reiterate. I'd like to refresh people's memory that, speaking up does make a difference. And how?
Yeah. Again, public opinion has shifted dramatically. I mean, to say that 60% of voters back in 2022 would be calling for an end of weapon sales to Israel, I mean, is that you can't even fathom that then. And so this is what 2 years of constant, principled, consistent organizing, educating, and mobilizing in the streets has done. And so when people try to say, well, why do you keep doing this? Why do you keep going out? Well, it's because it's working. It is working. And people are waking up. Again, 75% of Democrat voters, are against weapon sales to Israel, right? The youth, the young people, is overwhelmingly 91% against Israel's actions in Gaza. The U.S. people see this as a genocide. Even substantial numbers of American Jews call this a genocide. Substantial numbers. And you even see the polling with this, with Mamdani's win in New York in the Democratic primary. He won substantial numbers of Jewish New Yorkers. And so, again, to reiterate that Zionism is not Judaism, right? Like, there's been an anti-Zionist Jewish tradition since the beginning. And so, we're seeing this. And again, this is overcoming all kinds of indoctrination. It's overcoming all kinds of propaganda from the ruling class, corporate media, right? And so this has been really effective in the U.S., right? And globally too. I mean, globally, we're seeing incredible solidarity with Palestine right now. I mean, Italy literally is sending, naval ships, or maybe one, I don't know if there's two, but Spain is also sending one, to protect the flotilla that is going to take aid to the people in Gaza who are experiencing forced starvation and genocide, right? And it's not like Italy has a progressive prime minister. They have someone in the mold of Mussolini. Like, that is the political descendancy of their prime minister. And yet, because the working class in Italy is organized enough to do a general strike for Gaza. Mm-hmm. Like that is the level of organization that it is developing in places in Italy, in Spain, in Greece, in all these different places where you're getting European countries to start, they're sanctioning, Israel. You have people saying, if Netanyahu comes to our country, we're going to arrest him. Like there's Iceland and all these countries are boycotting Eurovision if Israel gets to be there, right? And so this is creating the dynamics that started to create around South Africa, as apartheid became so demonized and as rightfully so, and as South Africa became so isolated geopolitically in the world, right? I mean, the only two people that stood with two nations that stood with South Africa till the end, the U.S. and the U.S. finally started to pull away, but Israel was the other country, and Israel stood with South Africa till the very end, and even helped South Africa test nuclear weapons. Like this apartheid brothers, essentially. These are these two nations. And so the global movement is growing and growing, and Israel is becoming more and more isolated. And so that's why we just got to keep going. We got to keep educating. We got to keep having conversations. We got to meet people where they're at. We got to keep mobilizing and build real strategic power. Like imagine if UPS workers had the kind of consciousness that the workers in Italy have right now. Like we could shut down the American economy to end this genocide. Like, and so we don't want to get demoralized. We want to say, hey, we made a lot of progress. Now let's take it to the next level. Let's organize and let's create this consciousness that will lead to real change.
Well said.
So some listeners, may still be wondering, like, how does this connect to them? How does this come back home to them? So for people here in the U.S., what is the impact of like the normalization of genocide? Why should they care?
I mean, first off, your tax dollars are paying for this. $3.8 billion a year goes to Israel from America, right? From the United States. And now since, I don't even know if it's since October 7th of 2023, but I believe I was reading a number about over $22 billion in military aid has been given to Israel from the United States. And if folks just want to go on the website, not my tax dollars, notmytaxdollars.com. I mean, if you go on there and you will be able to see, you can type in your state and see what that amounts to, what federal tax dollars that amounts to in Washington and what that could be used for. I looked up what that could be used for in Spokane, and it's about 16 million of Spokane tax dollars, over 10,000 households with 1 month's free rent. Right? 34,000 families with 1 month's free groceries, over 5,600 children's free or low cost health care for 1 year, 177 elementary school teachers' salary for 1 year, and finally 429 students' loan debt canceled. Think about where that money can be going to. And our government keeps telling us we don't have money. We don't have money to fund Social Security, Medicare, Medicaid, right? We've got to take away from the people who are struggling, from the working class. We've got to take away the money because we can't fund it. But yet we can spend $22 billion. We can send $22 billion to Israel in 1 year. Right? I mean, I don't understand insanity. How that, right? How doesn't that motivate you and fire you up? Right? The tactics that we're seeing them use, the IDF use against Palestinians are coming here, right? When you see how the U.S. police are treating protesters, right? The techniques that they're using. When you see, the NYPD just went and did a training with them. We know our U.S. police, our ICE, Border Patrol, the FBI, they train with Israel's military, right? They have training and exchange programs. That's a fact, right? So we're seeing those tactics, that repression happening here. The surveillance technology that's being used to surveil Palestinians is being used here now, right? Those drones that you're seeing, right? That's coming from Israel. So we've got to understand that, one, if you can't have empathy, I think just being a human being, you should care. But if that's not your jam, then, your tax dollars, right, going to this should infuriate you when you're paying $9 for a carton of eggs or for a dozen eggs, right? But then the fact that, it's now coming home to us. So those are some of the things I can think of, and I'll stop my rant
I would
now.
Just say, what you're talking about there is connecting our struggle here to the liberation of the Palestinian people.
Yes.
Because the same ruling class that is funding and driving war and genocide are the same people paying you poverty wages, profiting off of your unaffordable housing and your college and medical debt. And the same people who give you 10 vacation days a year are the people destroying the planet for profit, right? Mm-hmm. And then you think about, right, your money for healthcare, housing, and jobs. We don't have healthcare in this country. We don't have affordable housing. We don't have good jobs, right? We have, people go into debt for education. All the money for that is in the trillions we spend on war and funding Israel's genocide, funding ICE raids on farm workers who are exploited, just trying to survive and feed their families, just like you and me, right? And so everything the Palestinians are facing, everything the farm workers are facing, everything working class people here are facing, it's all because of the same group of billionaires and this oligarchy that wants to dominate the world for their own profit without any regard to anybody else's life or the future of the planet. And they're also giving themselves huge tax cuts, right? For themselves, right? So, anyways, I just loved what you said.
No, I think none of us are free until all of us are free.
Yes.
I mean that.
100%.
Yes. We really, in this regard, need to understand intersectionality, both oppression and of our struggles, right? And the crackdown on the Palestine solidarity movement, it's part of bulldozing the way for more authoritarian attacks, right? So while the Palestine solidarity movement and, others are also on the front lines of this, the aim is to crush all dissent, right? To make an enemy of all struggles that stand in the way of tyranny and oligarchy and empire. So we're really going to need to grow our movement's abilities to engage in intersectionality of struggle, right? Because we are on an alarmingly fast slide towards authoritarianism, but how far we go depends entirely on the actions of ordinary people in this moment, right? And the response can only be collective courage, collective organizing, and collective movements for collective liberation. And in this regard, I think there's a tendency, and we need to focus on the fear and the shock and the awe, but that can't be all that we focus on, right? We need a sharp analysis of what we're up against, but that also means a sharp analysis of our own power, right? Knowing that if enough regular people take stances of non-cooperation and disobedience and actual defiance and commitment to our common humanity, we can begin to win the world that the majority of us want.
Yeah, hope is a choice. I tell myself that again and again. They want us all to feel hopeless, right? Because that's when we stop and that's when we give up. And so hope is a choice. And I think we have to look at, even if you go back to that poem, right, from Nazi Germany, where they say first they didn't come first, right, for the Jewish people. They came first for the communists, right? They came first for that group that had that negative connotation, right? And so we have to think about that. Like, pretty soon you're going to be the only one standing if you don't speak up, and you're not going to have anyone to fight with you. And so those are the things we have to think about, and we have to have radical hope.
I love that. And do it now while you have others to organize with before they're all gone because of the silence, right? I think everything's so fractured these days. It's really hard to organize people. And, that's because there's a lot of static. There's a lot of things that are constantly scrambling the American people's brains, literally, okay? TV, social media, technology. And, I was listening to Democracy Now! Just recently. I think it was something like 3% of Americans, if they could get together, could make true change in America. It just takes 3%,
3.5%
of 100% of American citizens to get to. And you're telling me that right now, in modern day 2025, that it's that difficult to get 3% of people together, right? And to agree, right, that they want a specific change. I don't think it's impossible, right? I do believe that it can be done. It's just, I think everything seems so splintered. And then right when you see things start to try to come back together and sort of meld again, there's another form of sensationalism to try to pull us apart. Yeah. And I think staying focused on what the common goal is, right, no matter what, is equally as important.
Yeah, it can happen. We just saw it happen with Jimmy Kimmel, my friends.
We did.
Right? I mean, it took 2 days and they were put him back on air because people boycotted. They lost, billions of dollars. It can happen.
It can. And that's a perfect example. But it shouldn't take a celebrity being punished for us to care. And I think that's something that I do have an issue with for what happened.
Oh, yeah.
I'm happy to see it, in front of our eyes with something that is, something tangible for most Americans to be able to digest. But you should care, even if it's not Jimmy Kimmel, right? Even if it's just the person standing on the corner, right, with a sign. We should care, right? But for some reason, we cared a lot more about one person.
A wealthy white man?
A wealthy white man, yes, in America.
A wealthy white man, and we had outrage.
But you did see that when people do come together and organize.
Exactly.
Right? That he was back on the air within 4 days.
It's an example. It can happen.
It can.
It's sad that it was that brought people out.
Well, and we can just look at history if we want a different example, right? I mean, like in 1855, most people would have said you're crazy if you said slavery is going to be over in 10 years, right?
True.
And so, that was a struggle that, people were trying to end slavery for centuries, right? But the consciousness finally was raised to the point where it became a mass movement, a mass struggle, right? And consciousness, of course, of white people was shifting and changing. They were joining the cause, giving their lives for this. And enslaved people themselves were rising up in mass. Like the Civil War really was a mass slave uprising where they fought and liberated themselves, really, right? And the way the consciousness of white Union soldiers shifted when they saw their service in the war, I mean, that leads to this period of Reconstruction where you do have an incredible period of multiracial democracy in the South, right? And really, you know, was a really grand attempt at democracy and was undone by, you know, white supremacist violence eventually. But, I mean, that is... to think that millions of people were liberated and 10 years earlier, people would have thought that would have been impossible, right? Like, yeah.
It sounds familiar, though, with the white supremacist part of that equation. Right?
Norms can change very quickly, right?
Yeah, things can change on a dime, right? Like you think, oh, wow, liberation's so far away, and then
tomorrow
suddenly
it could happen tomorrow.
You know, like that's why you just got to keep organizing and be ready.
I also think that piece that you talked on of Reconstruction, because even after slavery ended, they didn't really know how to implement that on a large scale across the country. And a lot of people were still oppressed, murdered, right? Yeah. Even after they were set free. So, you know, I think that's something that we also need to remember is even when we get there, you know, it's still a long road ahead to stay committed.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. The systemic racism never went away. No. I mean, that's been there. It went underground, and now it's just come back out.
And now it's back on the surface.
Right. Now it's okay again. But it was always there, right? The 13th Amendment was specifically passed, you know, putting the position of slavery was never went away fully, right? The 13th Amendment permits slavery, right? And which is why you then saw them move to arrest, right, the freed enslaved people to find trumped up reasons to arrest them so that they could then have their free labor. So I think we also have to understand that as well. Take those wins and see the steps forward and recognize that there's still work to be done, right?
Yeah. Sure. And like Angela Davis says, freedom is a constant struggle, but it doesn't mean we can't get to the roots of that oppression, right? And this is a part of, you know, overcoming just reformism, right? Like we actually need root responses to racist capitalist imperialism.
And the first step is saying something.
Speak up.
Saying something. Right? That's the whole, I think that's right now where I think a lot of people are stuck at. It's like, you know, that silence piece that we talked on earlier, like it's becoming too much of a cultural norm today. I'm just going to be quiet because I want to keep my job. I'm just going to be quiet.
Yeah, right.
I'm just going to be quiet. You know what? It's not worth it. And I have a family, right? I have people that are like, you know, counting on me. And that's a terrible decision for a person who actually does have a conscience and does care about their fellow person in this world to have to make that decision. You know, and so the slavery piece never ended. It's implemented differently now. You know, the minimum wage is the new slavery. You know, we'll pay you just enough so that you can live and continue to make us a profit and keep the wheels turning for capitalism, but just enough to where you'll never actually ever be part of our club, right? And you're never ever going to be a billionaire, right?
No.
And that's strategic too, to keep people impoverished, because if people are impoverished, they don't have the time, the energy, and the resources to organize for a better world.
Exactly.
Yes.
And that is where community and coming together and supporting each other and trying to fill those needs, right? However possible, and working together to feed each other, to be there for each other, to be there for each other's mental health, right? There's a lot of components here, right? Education, right? Basic physical and mental health, and your basic hierarchy of needs, right? And those things can be met, right? When organizations come together and become a powerhouse. But, you know, I want to see more of it. I want to see more of this coming together. You know, I think everybody feels like they're in a silo. You know, especially as an American, you sit there and you know you eat your TV dinner and you watch your Fox News or whatever, and you know you don't realize that there's a whole world out there, right? There's a whole world of people out there outside of whatever, you know, backwater town you have grown up in, and you're, you know, and like are now paying taxes for something you have no idea what is going on. I think it's just education is the biggest piece, and if we are quiet, you are unable to educate.
Speaking of coming together, a couple opportunities for people to do that coming up. October 4th, 1 p.m., Red Wagon, Rise Up for Gaza protest. So people should come out. If you've never come out to one, come on out. It's going to be high energy. There's going to be a lot of, you know, political clarity given. There's going to be chanting. There's going to be Hopefully a march if we have good numbers. And then October 18th, No Kings 2.0 protest at VA Clark Park, 1 p.m. And this is, trying to build a united mass movement against this fascistic administration and this billionaire class. And we got PSL, Party for Socialism and Liberation, and Spokane Indivisible, Vets for Peace, Jewish Voice for Peace, Do Better Gonzaga, Gonzaga Mutual Aid Club, Inland Northwest Coalition for the Liberation of Palestine. Labor groups are getting involved. There's so many people coming together for this, and it's going to be really exciting to start to get people plugged into this united movement. So,
well, I think that's a great way. We talked about community. I mean, that's a great way to do it. Attend these rallies and protests, and attend one of these groups, or get involved with one of the groups that Scott just mentioned. Right? I mean, building that community to do that. PSL in the Northwest Coalition for the Liberation of Palestine, Jewish Voice for Peace, which started a chapter a year ago here in Spokane. There's Veterans for Peace. Like, there's so many groups there are groups out there that are doing this work. And so if you want to just even start to begin to even educate yourself and begin to develop that community or find your community, start doing that. We have rallies, protests, teach-ins, film festivals, all that kind of stuff that can help. You can go to our website, the Inland Northwest Coalition for the Liberation of Palestine, has resources on books and articles to read. If you're like, I'm just learning about this, I don't know. That's another way they try to silence you. Like, you don't understand. It's too complex. It's too complicated. Oh, if I hear that one more time, genocide is not complicated. So doing that, if you're one of those folks who just don't feel that you have the knowledge, there's books we can recommend and things you can do to learn and educate yourself. I think that's really important. And I could talk about other ways too, right? Like, if you don't feel comfortable speaking up, boycott, divest, sanction, my friends, BDS, right? You have power with where you spend your money. Right? And so think about that. We just talked about the whole Kimmel thing, but think about all of that. There are apps you can download. No Thanks app, Boycott app, that you go in and scan in the grocery store. You can scan the QR or the code, and it will tell you if they are supportive of Israel, right? And you can then know, okay, I'm not going to spend my money with this company, right? So there are things you can do that way too if you don't want to speak up. And one more plug I will say is contact your elected representatives and tell them to vote and sign on to Block the Bombs Act that is right now in Congress at the federal level. We only have, I say only, people are excited because we have 50 people who have signed on to this and co-signed, which is absolutely the most ridiculous thing I've ever heard. But so get on there and call your elected representatives. We just had the Progressive Caucus, right, that just came out in support of the Block the Bombs. So anyway, that's my pitch for what people can do.
I love that.
And I would just add on, just a couple things. Is you talked a lot about education, and that's super important. I think a big part of our role here in the U.S., in the belly of the beast, inside this violent empire, right? My students that I teach, their entire life, their country has been at war. Yep. And these are teenagers. Right. And so we need to continue to raise consciousness, and we need to get even better at it. Right. And we have to be able to explain it and to make it understandable and to make it, for people to see who the enemy is. That is this billionaire ruling class that is fueling, capitalist violence and racism and imperialism, and understanding how that's impacting their lives, right? And we got to start meeting them where they're at, right? We can't just jump all the way to a place where they're gonna be turned off, right? We got to meet them where they're at. We got to find out how it relates to their life, how it connects to them, and when we raise that consciousness, then we can grow this into an even more mass movement, and then we can make it even more organized to where we can get to these strategic choke points of the economy like UPS and Amazon and dock workers, and where we can actually shut down the economy to stop a genocide, or even go further than that. Let's make sure we have healthcare as a right, as a human right. Let's make sure we have housing as a human right. Let's have education as a human right. So, education, building that consciousness, and the exciting thing is it is starting to happen, right? 43% of adults have a favorable view of socialism in the U.S. 60% of people under the age of 30. This is huge, right? People are seeing this crisis of imperialist war, of climate catastrophe, of the threat of AI in the hands of the billionaires, right? And they're saying like, this system does not work. And we need a system in which working and oppressed people have the power to plan the society and the economy to meet the needs of the people on the planet. And that's what we can do. So,
Yep.
I just want to, know how much further can we go, right? The trajectory that we're on right now, with the amount of money that's being put into these types of situations like Israel, right? $22 billion. How much more can we sustain as a nation before it's over, right? Before the system is crippled, right? I mean, how much more money can we borrow from the ether to perpetuate war?
Yeah. I don't know. When you see that our defense budget is now almost $1 trillion, that's just unfathomable to me. But yet we can't have health care for all.
Yeah, my grandparents, they went into bankruptcy at the end of their lives because of medical debt. They worked their whole lives. I mean,
and how were they rewarded?
Yeah,
more
exactly.
debt,
right? Yeah,
mediocre healthcare sometimes.
Yeah.
Well, thank you for all your insights. I mean, this struggle, right, that affects not just Palestinians, but all of us who believe in justice and human dignity, right? We're going to leave the listeners with a reminder that silence is also position and that action is possible. I want to thank you guys so much for being on tonight. I know it's getting a little late. We've been going for a while. So you guys are awesome. Thank you for what you do, what you've gone through, what you've been through, and for caring about the world, right? So
yeah, thank you
so much.
Thank you for having us on to talk about this.
Yeah.
Camaraderie matters.
Yeah.
Exactly. Well, this is all about community and supporting community, right? And that's what we have to do to make change. So thank you guys so much.
Thank you.